Om Tavakatamratam Tapta Jivanam Kavibhirididam Kalmashapaham Shravanamangalam Shrimadatam Bhuvigarnanti Bhuridajana. Tavakatamratam, your words are like nectar, tapta jivanam, bringing life to scorched souls. Kavibhiriditam, praised by poets and the wise. Kalamashapaham, putting an end to sin. Shravana Mangalam, auspicious to hear. Shrimad Atatam, beautiful and exalted. Bhuvi Garnantiye Bhuridajana, those who will spread these words throughout the world are blessed indeed. And this is the verse that M himself chose as the pranam mantra, we can say, for the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna, taken from the Gopi Gita from the Bhagavata, which was supposed to be the words of the gopis addressed to Sri Krishna. Okay, last time we're reading from Swami Nikhilanandaji's translation of the Kathamrita, the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna. Visit to Vidyasagar. This is page 101. This is the third chapter, and it's August 5th, 1882. And Sri Ramakrishna is in the Vidyasagar's drawing room. You'll remember Vidyasagar was a great scholar and philanthropist and educationalist and Sanskritist and master of Bengali grammar. He wrote several books, but mostly famous for his tremendous compassion, his hard work for certain reform movements, widow remarriage, abolishment of child marriage, many things. He was considered really one of the gems of Bengali culture and society at that time, and Sri Ramakrishna was anxious to meet him. So they've been having a conversation. Vidyasagar was very reticent about giving religious instruction to others. He had studied Hindu philosophy. Once, when M had asked him his opinion of it, Vidyasagar had said, "I think the philosophers have failed to explain what was in their minds." Of course, this is a problem with the philosophy. I was a philosophy student, so I had to read through a lot of philosophy, and you wonder sometimes, first of all, most of them are not very good writers. This is they don't go into philosophy because they're very good writers and can explain things very easily, and they like highly technical terms and make up words and all sorts of things. And actually, when I first read the Gita, and I saw how ideas can be put so simply into language, then I was really amazed. And then, of course, when we get to Sri Ramakrishna and those of that class, the great saints who speak in parables and everything, we find that these great truths can be put into very simple language. So this is Vidyasagar's idea. I think the philosophers have failed to explain what was in their minds. But in his daily life, he followed all the rituals of the Hindu religion and wore the sacred thread of a Brahmin. So he shared some of the reformist ideas with the Brahmo Samaj, but wasn't a Brahmo. He wasn't looking to start some new sect, some kind of Unitarian thing, and that was opposed to image worship and guru and avatar, other ideas of Hinduism. So he was a combination of the old traditional Hindu culture and the modern reformist movement. About God, he had once declared, "It is indeed impossible to know him. What then should be our duty? It seems to me that we should live in such a way that if others followed our example, this very earth would be heaven. Everyone should try to do good to the world." A nice idea. It's a very beautiful idea. And we can hardly think of a higher ideal when it comes to that side of life. The difference is with Sri Ramakrishna, there was a whole world, a spirit world, that to him was more real than this world, that we'll see, he felt that Vidyasagar had failed to appreciate, we can say. But otherwise, it's a beautiful ideal. There's really nothing we can criticize about it. Sri Ramakrishna's conversation now turned to the knowledge of Brahman. Master, Brahman is beyond vidya and avidya, knowledge and ignorance. It is beyond Maya, the illusion of duality. Now, this illusion of duality, I read this phrase this morning, and I had never really thought about it. What exactly does he mean, the illusion of duality? Huh? What do you think he really means, the illusion of duality? Of course, we can say that everything in Maya is a dvandva, what they call a dvandva, that everything is up and down and hot and cold and good and bad. It could be that. Or, if we look at this idea, and I may be wrong, but this idea of vidya and avidya, separating everything, or sat and asat, real and unreal, that this is an illusory distinction. And Sri Ramakrishna actually says that this distinction between the real and the unreal is provisional. He says this is for the sake of sadhana. He doesn't take this idea that Brahman alone is real and the world is unreal. He doesn't take that as a final truth. It's a very interesting distinction, subtle distinction between his understanding of this idea, Brahma Satyam Jagat Mithya, and what we come to think as Shankaracharya's idea. For Sri Ramakrishna, this was a provisional attitude. And if we think about it, it's a dualistic attitude. Huh? We're separating everything into two categories. Something that's real and something that's unreal. Now, we can split hairs and say that, well, the unreal won't constitute a category because it's unreal. There's nothing there. It's like saying, somebody can object, well, you're saying there are two categories, there's a snake and a rope. Huh? So they'll say, of course, there's only the rope. Snake is unreal, so it's not really a category. But what Sri Ramakrishna is saying, that in the beginning, when we're climbing up the steps, then we do make a dichotomy between what is real and what is unreal. Now, Sri Ramakrishna did something which I personally think is a tremendous service in terms of philosophy. I've been reading this gospel for almost 50 years now, very seriously. When I first read it, I very quickly came to the conclusion that Sri Ramakrishna was brilliant, that his intellect was so sharp that I won't even compare Shankaracharya or Ramanuja or anyone, even Swamiji. I've never come across a mind that was so subtle with these distinctions as his. So I read this on several levels. I read it, of course, for the inspiration. I read it for this lila idea, so that we feel that we're in his presence, but also his understanding was so subtle, his way of explaining things. And the difference, of course, at least with the ordinary philosophers, is that he didn't have to imagine anything. He was simply trying to put into words his direct experience. So anybody who does that, they don't have to worry about any internal contradictions in their philosophy. You know, they say one thing about people who tell lies. If you tell lies, you always have to remember what you said. Huh? Otherwise, you may tell one lie and it'll contradict a different lie. If you tell the truth, you never have to worry about that. No matter what you say, it's not going to contradict anything because events took place in only one way and you're recounting them, that's all. So for Sri Ramakrishna, it was all based on his direct experience. But the contribution that I think he made was to, first of all, explain that this idea of the unreality of the world is provisional, is not a final truth, that things have gotten mixed up, sat and asat. They've gotten mixed up. And the main way that they're mixed up is with the self and the coverings of the self, in particular the mind and ego sense. This is the main way they've been mixed up. And we have to separate them somehow. So we have to be dualists. Even the Advaitin has to be a dualist, and try to separate the real self from the apparent self, Sat and Asat, even though this is an illusory distinction, the illusion of duality. So this is the illusion of duality, that there's a real self and an unreal self, or a real self and an apparent self. Now, what Sri Ramakrishna does is he explains that this is only so that we can disentangle something that's gotten mixed up with something else. So he gives some very nice examples. Most of us are like that mixture of milk and water. And you pour milk into water, and somebody says, now retrieve the milk. It's very difficult. It's all been all mixed up together. We hope that we're not in that sorry condition. We hope that we're more like the example in the Upanishads. If you take grass and it has different stems to it, and they seem to be all connected and tied up, and that in the center of that will be the real self, we can say. But actually, they can be pulled apart. They're not really connected, only apparently connected. When we cut grass, sometimes we cut grass for puja. It has to have these three, what do they call them? Stems, something like that. And if we cut it in the wrong place, it'll fall apart before we even get it. So they're not really connected. So what Sri Ramakrishna is saying is that, yes, we have to take this dualistic position between the real and the unreal. Now, there'll actually be several things that impress me so much. One is that his distinction won't be between real and illusory. It'll be between permanent and impermanent. It'll be between, whenever he says, Brahma Satyam, almost always he'll say, Jagat Anitya. He'll either Anitya or Avastu. Anitya means non-eternal, transient, and Avastu means something like insubstantial. Not even from a philosophical point of view, insubstantial, hollow somehow. I mentioned this earlier. There's a term called Padartha. Padartha is a Sanskrit term that means something that is an actual, real, existent category thing. And there's a apadartha, which will be the exact opposite. I was surprised when I learned that in Bengali, and probably Hindi, other languages, apadartha means a worthless fellow. A worthless person. It doesn't mean that the person is non-existent or illusory or anything. There's no inner stuff. So this, when Thakur says, avastu, that it doesn't mean that this world is an illusion. It means that there's something hollow about it. It can't fulfill us. It can't satisfy us. So this is one thing. So now we have two things. One is that this sadasat is not a final truth. It's something that will help us climb the steps till we get to the roof. Second thing is that the asat doesn't have to be taken as something illusory or completely unreal. It'll be shadowy. It'll be a little bit in between. But if we understand it in terms of transitory, then we can easily see what is changing and what is not changing. The witness is not changing, everything else is changing. And if we say that, well, what about we have Himalayas, we have mountains that have been there for millions or billions of years, barely changing, certainly not noticeably changing. And what if we even posit, suppose that a world can be created where nothing changes in it. Just assume that. Does that mean that this world is now nitya? No, because we're changing. We're the ones who are fleeting. We're the ones that are just flying by. That's the impermanent nature of existence, not physical things so much, but of existence. I like that nursery rhyme. Row, row, row your boat gently down the stream. Merrily, 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 life is but a dream. So it's like that. We're rowing our boat down the stream of time. And that's the anitya element of it. Okay, so these are two things. Now, the third thing that to me is very important is that one can accept the reality of the world, relative reality of the world. Because Sri Ramakrishna says once we get to the roof and work our way back down, then we see this universe as real. So he puts everything, flips it on its head. Somebody asked him one time, is the world then unreal? He said, as long as you haven't realized God, it's unreal. After the realization of God, it's real. On the face of it, it sounds like a perfect refutation of Shankaracharya's philosophy. But we have to understand it's not. What he's saying is that our conception of the world now as something independent and material is false. When we understand this world as the manifestation of Brahman or the Divine Mother, then we'll understand the reality of it. So we can say that now, this if we're seeing the snake instead of the rope, we're seeing something that's false. And when we understand that it's really the rope, then we can say that we're seeing something that's real. So this is another thing. Now, what to me is important is that Sri Ramakrishna can be an Advaitin from the point of view, which is the essential point of view, that he takes this ego, this I, as a false superimposition on Brahman itself, on pure consciousness, on the real self, on the Atman, giving the appearance of many individual souls. Or he'll use the example, of course, of the sun. If we confuse the sun with the reflection, we'll say there are many suns, there are many individual souls, but there's only the one real sun. So what Sri Ramakrishna is telling us is that this Brahma Satyam, Brahman alone is real, and Jiva Brahmaiva Naparaha, the Jiva is nothing other than Brahman. These two things can be accepted, and at the same time say that the world is not mithya, that Jagat is anitya, that it's fleeting. So, interesting, because I had a philosophy professor in college who I didn't appreciate at the time. He was actually very brilliant. I thought I knew everything because here I'm studying Swamiji and all of this, but he said something which now I understand was a very subtle idea, very good idea. He said that when we talk about Advaita and Vishishta Dvaita and Dvaita, the three schools of Vedanta, that the distinguishing feature of the Advaitin will be that this oneness of the individual self and the Supreme Self, not the illusory or real nature of the universe. This is something that is secondary. There can be many different types of Advaitins, and Sri Ramakrishna was that type of Advaitin who belonged to the Shakta school, if we want to pigeonhole him, and I don't. I want to make that clear, but we can say that he liked the Shakta philosophy, where they'll say this universe is a manifestation of the divine, which really, or a projection, really is closer to the Upanishadic idea. Now, just to clarify things a little bit, Sri Ramakrishna had a unique take on the different schools of philosophy. He did not look upon them as truth. We'll get to that. It is not that one is true and one is false, or one is better or one is worse. They're different paths. When he said Joto Matoto Pot, we always take that as meaning different faiths. We can easily take it as the different schools of Vedanta, all the different philosophical schools. He took them as different spiritual paths. We were reading last night in the Great Master. And just to mention again, that's a fantastic companion book to the Gospel. Those of you who are reading the Gospel, you'll find tremendous light is shed on it by the Gospel. Anyhow, Swami Atmajnanananda, who wrote that, he was saying that Sri Ramakrishna recommended mostly, for most of the devotees, what we would call Vishishta Dvaita Vedanta. It's qualified non-dualism, and he gave many examples, the bell fruit, that we accept that it has many seeds to it. So, and it has a hard outer shell. So and it all belongs to the same reality. So some people will claim, will even fight, no, Sri Ramakrishna was a qualified non-dualist. But again, it's missing the point. That for some, that spiritual attitude he felt was most helpful in order to get to the roof. And truth had nothing to do with how we get to the roof. Well, I shouldn't say nothing, but the real truth is the experience of Brahman, the direct experience, and it doesn't matter if we follow a dualistic path or a non-dualistic path. The one distinction will be that the roof represents oneness. So in that sense, we can say that he really, the qualified non-dualists and the dualists won't really accept his final conclusion about things, because they'll want to say that even in the state of liberation, there's separation. For Sri Ramakrishna, there's merging. And how did he know it? He spent 6 months in that state. And then almost daily he could go into that state. When this I consciousness disappears, then Brahman alone exists. There's only oneness in that state. So this all came out because I read it this morning, this idea that Maya, when this phrase, the illusion of duality. So this distinction between real and unreal, that's also an illusory distinction. Because after realization we see everything is real. Only some things are a manifestation of that reality, and some things are the reality itself. So the seer and the seen are both equally one with the Brahman, but one is the manifestation, just as the dream is a manifestation of the dreamer, but the actor in the dream is the dreamer itself. Another subtle distinction. But both get resolved back into the dreamer, into Brahman. And the dreamer gets resolved back into the sleeper. So, for Sri Ramakrishna, this oneness was the final truth. But then, the path to getting to that involves this path of discrimination or devotion. Discrimination, vichara, or discernment. Discrimination, we try to avoid that term nowadays, but where we have to have this dualistic distinction between Sat and Asat. And the path of devotion, we also have a distinction between the devotee and the object of worship. These, because the ladder that we're climbing to get to the roof, it belongs to the relative plane. We have no other choice. So anyhow, this all came out of just this one simple phrase, the illusion of duality. That's an interesting phrase. Then he goes on. The world consists of the illusory duality of knowledge and ignorance. It contains knowledge and devotion, and also attachment to lust and gold, righteousness and unrighteousness, good and evil. Another way of saying this is even on the relative plane, we'll find that there's sattva and then there's rajas and tamas. We talk about the three gunas. I like to think of it as two gunas, because sattva is so different. Rajas and tamas, they kind of run into each other a little bit. They're both holding us back. Tamas can kill us. That'll take us lower and lower. Rajas won't do much better. It'll keep us stuck with the same round of desire and satisfaction, but sattva can save us. But even sattva belongs to the relative plane, and we have to transcend that. But that's the very final rung of the ladder going to the roof. The very final one. We don't start out with this idea of let me transcend sattva. We start out with this idea, let me develop sattvic qualities so that I can get rid of all this rajas and tamas. So this, when we say righteousness and unrighteousness, good and evil, we can say that these lower gunas and the higher ones. But Brahman is unattached to these. So now the Brahman, if we think of Brahman as this witnessing consciousness, because to be honest, we don't really have much direct access to this Brahman as the projector of the universe. What we have direct access to is a Brahman dwelling within as the real self. We have access to the reflected sun. Sri Ramakrishna says in one place, or probably several places, that you want to know what the real sun is like, then go through that reflected sun. So we have to turn within. If somebody says, well, Brahman is the ground of this whole universe, let me look without. I ever say, good luck. Because we only see objects. How do we know what the thing in itself, what underlies it? Very hard to say, but that this Brahman consciousness is within me and is witnessing and hearing everything that I say, I know that directly. So that's our direct access to that. So when it says Brahman is unattached to these, we know that this witness, Brahman dwelling within as the higher self, as the witness, that witness is unaffected, not only unattached but unaffected. Somebody says something to me and I get angry. The witness doesn't get angry, the mind gets angry and the witness observes. The witness can't if the witness could have different states, then it would need another witness to observe those states. And we wouldn't have that sense of integration of self-existence. So the witness is completely unchanging. Good and evil apply to the jiva, the individual soul, and we can easily say to the mind. And we can even break it down and say that all of these things are different vrittis that arise in the mind, as do righteousness and unrighteousness, but Brahman is not at all affected by them. One man may read the Bhagavata by the light of a lamp, and another may commit a forgery by that very light, but the lamp is unaffected. The sun sheds its light on the wicked as well as on the virtuous. When Thakur gives one of his very favorite examples, when the sun is reflected in the water in the jar, that sun may be very hazy. The water may be murky. That sun may look like it's a little bit moving, disturbed, if the water is disturbed. But is the real sun hazy? Does the real sun move when the reflection moves? No. Completely unaffected. Nothing can possibly affect it. Is the reflection in the mind itself that gives the appearance that that sun has been affected, but in reality it's not affected. The sun sheds its light on the wicked as well as the virtuous. You may ask, how then can one explain misery and sin and unhappiness? The answer is that these apply only to the jiva. Brahman is unaffected by them. So when we say that, suppose somebody says that I am the self, I am the Atman. How can you say I'm a sinful person, I'm a bad person, anything? Yeah, from that point of view it's true. But have we realized it? If we're so identified with this, the lower self, the apparent self is the mask that goes over the Brahman. You know, there's a term persona. Persona, I hope I don't give wrong information, I think comes from the Greek meaning mask. So a persona means our personality. What is it? It's a mask that we wear. So that mask can have qualities. That can have good and bad, and we put the mask on and we play the part of a thief sometimes we play the part of the policeman. But the real self within is not affected by any of this. So the answer is that these only apply to the jiva, the individual soul. The individual soul is not different from the Atman. It is the Atman that got entangled, apparently, through false identification with the body, mind, the senses, and this ego sense. These apply only to the jiva. Brahman is unaffected by them. There is poison in a snake, but though others may die if bitten by it, the snake itself is not affected by the poison. Now, this illustration is used in several different contexts. When we start out with this idea, Brahma Satyam, Brahman is real, and it also means Brahman is the only sole existence, that nothing else exists but Brahman. Now, when it comes to trying to explain how this world can come into existence, even if it's a dream, Brahman's dream, how does it come into existence? The Advaitins come up with this idea of Maya. Not that they invented it. Maya is a very old term. We find it in the Rig Veda even. It means something like magic there. But we come up with this idea that there's something which causes Brahman to cease simply being pure consciousness and to somehow project this universe, enter into this universe, identify with the individual, and then under the influence of ignorance, fail to see that it's really consciousness itself and takes it for some external universe, and everyone is separate and all of that. So then the question comes that what about this Maya? You said that Brahman alone exists, Brahman alone is real. Now you're saying there's a second thing, Maya. So they come up with different ideas that, when we reach illumination, Maya disappears. If it can disappear, then it was never real to begin with, so you don't have to ask where it came from. Somebody says, where did the darkness come from? They said, well, there's really no such thing as darkness. You've hidden the light of the sun, that's all. There's nothing real. You remove the impediment. You let the cloud dissipate, and you'll see that the sunlight is there again. So don't talk about this darkness as something real. It's just a failure to see the light. The light doesn't exist at that time. This is one type of answer. The other thing is that since this Maya has an effect, it can't be considered completely unreal. So it's neither real nor unreal. Sadasad vilakshana can be described as either real or unreal. But it's characterized by avidya, ignorance. Now the problem is, where does this exist? If it exists within Brahman, then Brahman has a little infection, a little imperfection there. We can't have that. And if we say, no, it's outside of Brahman, then we have two things. We can't have that either. So then they come up with this kind of clever idea. Well, it's within Brahman, but Brahman is completely unaffected by it. Like the poison in the snake, which is protected by a little sac, so that the snake cannot be affected by the poison. So Brahman cannot be affected by ignorance. We can't say that ignorance is a quality of Brahman, but it's not non-existent. So they'll use this example also, this idea of the venom within the snake, which is not poisonous for the snake. You never hear of a snake dying of the poison that's inside of it. Maybe another snake can bite a snake, but it can die from its own venom that's inside of it. What Brahman is cannot be described. All things in the world, the Vedas, the Puranas, the Tantras, the 6 systems of philosophy, have been defiled like food that has been touched by the tongue, for they have been read or uttered by the tongue. Only one thing has not been defiled in this way, and that is Brahman. No one has ever been able to say what Brahman is. Now, this is another one of the kind of pet ideas that Sri Ramakrishna had. We have this term uchishta. Uchishta, if the very typical, I should say, Indian idea. In the West, we're not so particular about who can eat food when somebody else's plate and things like that. Of course, in India, I've seen with the schoolboys and close friends, they'll be sticking their hands in each other's plate and everything. But when they reach a certain age, and in certain Orthodox communities, if someone touches something, eats some food, then they have to finish it. They can't take a bite out of something and then give it to somebody else and say, now you finish it. It's uchishta. Then they're giving them the leftovers. And certainly if you offer food in the shrine, then not supposed to taste it first or anything like that, then you're giving leftovers. So uchishta, something that's been touched by the tongue. And that means the rest of it is somehow tainted or defiled. So everything is defiled because it's been put into the relative world of philosophical concepts, except for Brahman. Now, I mentioned before my very bad habit of remembering something very clearly and remembering where I read it and even memorizing verses and then forgetting them. So this is another instance. There's actually a very beautiful verse that says, Uchishtam sarva shastrani sarva vidya mukhe mukhe. So everything, all knowledge, all scriptures and everything has been defiled by this tongue and that tongue. No chishtam brahmano jnanam, but the knowledge of Brahman is the only thing that's not uchishta. And then I don't remember the rest of the verse. Is actually, there's a very beautiful, there are two very beautiful and very, very helpful compendiums to the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna, which, probably many more, these are the two that I know of, that came out of gospel classes that were recorded and put down in book form. One was Swami Lokeshwaranandaji, and the other Swami Bhuteshwaranandaji. And I don't know if Swami Lokeshwaraji is now translated. Both were in Bengali originally. But he found all of these verses. He had a good staff, the Institute of Culture. So he found all of these different verses. There's another one that I don't remember. You know, we hear about this annagata prana, that this Kali Yuga, that life is I forget how he puts it, life is involved in food or something like that. Each of the 4 yugas has a different one. I don't remember, Vidya Gata Prana, Yajna Gata Prana, something like that. So Thakur, he must have heard these things. He had so much contact. People would ask him, how do you know all these things? You don't even read or write or anything. He said, how many things I heard. Whenever these great pundits were discussing anything, even as a boy, he would go to the sadhus and he would listen very attentively and everything. So it's a little surprising because Vidyasagar, who was a great Sanskrit scholar, had not heard of this. Maybe it's a very obscure verse, I don't know. So Vidyasagar to his friends, oh, that is a remarkable statement. I've learned something new today, that everything has been defiled by the tongue, everything is eto, uchishta, except for Brahman. Master, a man had 2 sons. The father sent them to a preceptor to learn the knowledge of Brahman. After a few years, they returned from their preceptor's house and bowed low before their father. Wanting to measure the depth of their knowledge of Brahman, he first questioned the older of the 2 boys. My child, he said, you have studied all the scriptures. Now tell me, what is the nature of Brahman? The boy began to explain Brahman by reciting various texts from the Vedas. The father did not say anything. Then he asked the younger son the same question, but the boy remained silent and stood with eyes cast down. No word escaped his lips. The father was pleased and said to him, my child, you have understood a little of Brahman. What it is cannot be expressed in words. Now, we talk about it all of the time. The pure consciousness, Satchidananda, the ground and source of the universe. We say so many things about it. Thakur's idea, first of all, most of this is Saguna Brahman. If we're talking about Nirguna Brahman, there are no qualities. Whenever we talk, if we have to talk about a thing or a person, we have to do it in terms of their qualities. We can't say too much about anything unless we talk about the color, the shape, the attributes, the personality traits, all of these different things. If something is lacking that, if it's nirguna, if it's just pure existence, then there's nothing much we can say except that. Pure existence, if we want to say that. But problem is that if we start to speak of Brahman in that way, we start to think of it as an entity, as a thing. And this is also a great mistake. It's not a great being. It's not a great being that possesses the qualities of existence, knowledge, and bliss. It's existence itself. Knowledge means consciousness. And the bliss aspect is only known to those who have this direct experience of the self. Those knowers of Brahman, they become filled with bliss, and there's no other source for it but Brahman itself. So from that point of view, we can understand that we're somehow falsely attributing attributes, thinking that this Brahman is something that possesses some attributes when we start to describe it. It's nothing describable. In the Upanishads, all of the descriptions, or mostly all of the descriptions, will be negative things. That it's adrishyam, that it can't be seen, it can't be touched, asprishya, it can't be smelled, it's beyond the senses, it's beyond the pairs of opposites. Everything will be in a negative sense. There's nothing positive that we can say. That's why we have this neti. It's what remains after we've removed everything else. If we peel the onion, trying to describe what's in the center, as long as the onion's there, we can describe the center as, suppose there's a little hollow inside the onion. We can describe it, that it'll be a certain size and shape. Once we've peeled everything off, how to describe that? It's infinite, absolute space. No way to describe it. So this is what I think Thakur means when he says that what Brahman is cannot be explained in words. Mukhe bola jaye na. He says it over and over again. Men often think they have understood Brahman fully. A mistake. Once an ant went to a hill of sugar. One grain fills its stomach. Taking another grain in its mouth, it started homeward. On its way, it thought, next time I shall carry home the whole hill. See, Sri Ramakrishna, he said, even someone who realizes Brahman, can one say that I've understood all of Brahman? And then he says, is it necessary? And he gives a very nice example. One is said to achieve liberation by bathing in the Ganga. You go to the Ganges. He said if you go in one place and bathe, then you have achieved your goal. Is there any need to go in every single bathing ghat from Gomukh to all the way to Ganga Sagar, from the very beginning of the Ganges to each and every place all the way down till it reaches the Bay of Bengal? Any reason for that? All we have to do is realize it in one place, in one aspect. Of course, there are no aspects to Brahman, but through one particular path, and that's enough. He gives other nice examples. If you can get drunk from one bottle of wine, then what need you have of knowing how much wine, how many bottles of wine there are in the warehouse, in the wine cellar? So the ant thought, next time I shall carry home the whole hill. That is the way shallow minds think. They don't know that Brahman is beyond one's words and thought. However great a man may be, how much can he know of Brahman? Shukadeva and sages like him may have been big ants, but even they could carry at the utmost 8 or 10 grains of sugar. Now, Shukadeva is held up by Sri Ramakrishna as one of the greatest examples of someone who's very pure from birth and a great knower of Brahman. So whenever he talks about Shukadeva, we shouldn't think that he's saying, oh, this is an ordinary individual who maybe achieved some type of realization. He's talking about the highest possible class. He doesn't get into this idea as avatar, Ishvara Koti, anything like that, but as a knower of Brahman and a perfectly pure soul. So he says Shukadeva, Shuka and other sages. I skipped a place. Shukadeva and sages like him may have been big ants, but even they could carry at the utmost 8 or 10 grains of sugar. So basically he's saying, forget about it. Don't think any of us will carry the whole hill. Even these great souls, no matter how great, it's not possible to put the infinite into the limited receptacle of the mind. Thakur was very fond of this expression. Can you put 4 seers of milk in a pot that only holds 1 seer? We can't do it. We can have the experience of the infinite when we've transcended the ordinary mind. But if we want to do things that this mind can grasp the infinite, it can't do it. As for what has been said in the Vedas and the Puranas, do you ask what it is like? Suppose a man has seen the ocean, and somebody asks him, well, what is the ocean like? The first man opens his mouth as wide as he can and says, what a sight, what tremendous waves and sounds. The description of Brahman in the sacred books is like that. It is said in the Vedas that Brahman is of the nature of bliss. It is Satchit Ananda. So that means that the very vain attempt to try to explain what the experience is like. Shuka and other sages stood on the shore of this ocean of Brahman and saw and touched the water. According to one school of thought, they never plunged into it. Those who do cannot come back to the world again. I'll get to this. This is another big issue. In Samadhi, one attains the knowledge of Brahman, one realizes Brahman. In that state, reasoning stops altogether, and man becomes mute. He has no power to describe the nature of Brahman. Once a salt doll went to measure the depth of the ocean. All laugh. It wanted to tell others how deep the water was, but this it could never do, for no sooner did it get into the water than it melted. Now, who was there to report the ocean's depths? Okay, now, this is a very big topic, and Thakur talks about it very much. This question of, first of all, what does it mean really to get to the roof? What does it mean to have this ultimate experience of Brahman? Can it only be had in Nirvikalpa Samadhi? If one attains the state of Nirvikalpa Samadhi, then is it possible through any effort to bring the mind back down? Is it something that has to happen through one's past karma? Is it something that will only happen through the will of the Divine Mother? In Thakur's case, the voice of the Mother had to come to say remain in Bhavamukha. Or does the body just wither away and the individual go from that state of Jivan Mukti to Videha Mukti? That the mind is already merged and gone, one with the Brahman. For some time the body's there, then after some time it's not there. It makes no difference. It's completely irrelevant to the so-called individual who has that type of experience. Now, Sri Ramakrishna was very fond of saying that the body lasts 21 days in general for what he called the Jiva Koti. Jiva Koti, and I'm not sure where these technical terms come from, Ishvara Koti and Jiva Koti. But the Jiva Koti will be everyone with the exception of these very special souls, Adhikarika Purushas, that we generally know as the avatars and companions of avatars. Sri Ramakrishna used the expression Ishvara Koti, that they can come down from that state. The Jiva Koti will, the mind will remain merged, assuming that all this old karma is gone, there are no desires to pull it back down, the mind will remain merged, and the body will last only as long as it can last, which is more or less, or we can say exactly, 21 days. And this is something, if I remember correctly, that Sri Ramakrishna heard from Tarayanga Swami. Almost all of these interesting teachings that Thakur has. In the Kali Yuga, Naradiya Bhakti is best, that the body lasts 21 days, give a twist to the passion. All of these, he'll give little citations. I heard this from a wandering sadhu, I heard this from this devotee, that the Tarayanga Swami used to say this, and so I think it was from him, but it's not really important, because these were things that Thakur felt intuitively within. There's a very interesting story, incident, in the life of Swami Sarvagatanandaji. Swami Sarvagatanandaji was a disciple of Swami Akhandanandaji, and head of our Boston and Providence centers for many, many years. A very wonderful, wonderful soul. He joined in Kankal and worked in the hospital there. At that time, it was almost exclusively meant for sadhus. And there was one sadhu who was very ill, and he was there, but he was a very highly spiritual soul. And one day they saw that he went into a state that looked to everyone like samadhi, that just lost in meditation, wasn't dead, pulse was there, but very slow. All of the signs, the body showed some signs of death, but still the breath was there and everything. Now Swami Sarvagatanandaji, he used to say that before that, I took the things that Sri Ramakrishna said, accepted them, but maybe not literally. 21 days, what does that mean? That means that, it could be a week, 2 weeks, it could be 3 weeks. But he said after 21 days that the prana left the body. This is sadhu, exactly 21 days. He said after that I believed everything, everything literally. Anyhow, it's really not important, but the point here is that there's a certain type of realization that will be final. We can almost say that this for the ordinary soul, that unless we've reached the end of our prarabdha karma, that we've exhausted everything, we won't be able to get into that type of nirvikalpa samadhi. It's not that one day that I'll go into that type of samadhi and then I'll be gone in 3 weeks. I have to have really reached that point where there's nothing holding me back down anymore. There's no karma. Padartha karma has to be finished. Otherwise, like the brick on the mongoose, it'll pull the mind down a little bit. So, and this idea of the salt doll, we have to understand this. There are two ways to understand this. One is that if we do enter into that final merging in Brahman, then it's impossible to come back because there's no I left. That ego sense disappears. The mind is merged, just like the salt has become one with the ocean. Now, in the case of Sri Ramakrishna, who went back and forth, he could dive down to the bottom and come back whenever he felt like it. What he's saying to us, even for him, by the time he got down to the bottom, then somehow the salt doll was one with the ocean, but could reemerge as the salt doll, could come back together. So he's explaining two things. One is how in this very final state for the Jivakoti to attain this state of Nirvikalpa Samadhi, unless will of the Divine Mother feels something else, unless, Thakur says in some places, that this individual has some deep-seated desire for the welfare of others. There's also maybe a possibility. If those things aren't there, there's nothing to bring the mind back down again. Now for Sri Ramakrishna, even he could come back down, but by the time he's merged in that Brahman, the mind is not functioning anymore, so that there's nothing to come back and report. Huh? I was saying before that everything he says has a certain consistency to it because it's all based on experience. But this experience in Brahman is nothing that you can report about. There was an instance where one day he said, no, today I'm going to tell everything. I'm going to explain what happens when the mind goes higher and higher, when it gets into the different levels. And he could get as high as to maybe the Ajna Chakra. You know, you see light and you see the ultimate reality, only there's a little pane of glass, so you can't touch it. Every time he would start to say, when the mind goes to the 1,000-petaled lotus at the top of the head, Sahasrara, when he would do that, his mind would merge. And he would come back down and say, I wanted to tell you that experience. The minute I think of it, the mind goes into that. And they say that he actually shed tears that day, that he had such a desire to explain to them what that experience is like, and found that it was futile, that he couldn't do it, that he actually shed tears. So even for Sri Ramakrishna, because there's nothing to see, how do you report? You go down to the bottom of the ocean. It's not the ocean that has all the gems and things at the bottom. It's the ocean that's so deep that there's no light that penetrates. Nothing to report. There's only oneness there. So this was this idea of the salt doll. Went to measure the depth of the ocean. Wanted to tell others how deep the water was. If it can come back, it still can't tell how deep it is. If it's an ordinary soul, by the time it gets down there, there's no salt doll left anymore. Individuality is gone. So there's nothing to come back. A devotee. Suppose a man has obtained the knowledge of Brahman in Samadhi. Doesn't he speak anymore? Now there are certain ideas contained in this question, presuppositions. One is that someone can obtain the knowledge of Brahman in Samadhi and be able to come back and at least, even if he can't speak, to be able to come down from that state. Sri Ramakrishna hasn't exactly told him that an ordinary person won't come down from that state. But he's saying, suppose he has obtained the knowledge of Brahman. So number one presumption is that one can attain the knowledge of Brahman, two, in Samadhi, and he can come back from that. Then what happens after that? Now, Sri Ramakrishna says, he starts out with Shankaracharya. So already we know he's not talking about the Jivakoti. Shankaracharya will belong to a special class. Sri Ramakrishna always points to him as the example of the type of Vijnani who belongs to the Jnana Yoga class. So in Thakur's mind, he never says exactly Shankaracharya is an avatar or anything like that, but he'll always give him as that example. That means that he doesn't classify him as a jivakoti. He classifies him as one who had the highest realization and could come back and teach after that. Shankaracharya retained the ego of knowledge in order to teach others. Now, this is the Vijnana state. The Vijnani can be of two basic types. One, the Jnani will come back and will have this ego of knowledge. That means he'll be immersed in this idea, I am that. The devotee will come down and live in the relative plane in a relationship with God. So the devotee can be of many types. In Sri Ramakrishna's case, mostly it was he felt himself to be a child of the mother. Others can feel this servant of God. Any of the attitudes can be there. Here he's talking about Shankaracharya keeping the eye of knowledge. Shankaracharya retained the ego of knowledge in order to teach others. So there was a mission there. So perhaps before he had that highest realization, that very sattvic desire, not the type of desire that pulls one back down into the relative world of Maya, but the desire which allows one to go all the way to the roof and come back down as a Vijnani, that he had that desire. After the vision of Brahman, a man becomes silent. This would get him in trouble, because later we see when Dr. Sharkar, he said, you say one becomes silent, why do you talk so much? Then he'll explain. After the vision of Brahman, a man becomes silent. He reasons about it as long as he has not realized it. If you heat butter in a pan on the stove, if anyone has ever tried to make ghee, you'll know it'll sputter and do all sorts of things, then it'll get quiet after a while. It makes a sizzling sound as long as the water it contains has not dried up. But when no trace of water is left, the clarified butter makes no sound. If you put an uncooked cake of flour in that butter, it sizzles again. Okay, so that means that, yes, after the realization of Brahman, one has a tendency to remain silent. But they have a mission in life. They have teachings to give. And that's the whole reason why the mind can come back down again. So then they can start to speak again. But after the cake is cooked, all sound stops. Just so, a man established in samadhi comes down to the relative plane of consciousness in order to teach others. And then he talks about God. The bee buzzes as long as it is not sitting on a flower. That means we're still trying to get to the roof. The time of sadhana, it becomes silent when it begins to sip the honey. So that state of realization. But sometimes, intoxicated with the honey, it buzzes again. So the mind comes down a little bit lower, even if that tendency is there. They say with Sri Ramakrishna, and we'll stop here. They say with Sri Ramakrishna that, and again this is from the great master, after he had had his 6 long months of practically entirely in Nirvikalpa Samadhi, mind would come down from time to time a little bit, just to be able to swallow some food, but more or less 6 months in Nirvikalpa Samadhi. After that, there was a tremendous tendency of the mind to practice this, not practice silence, to remain silent, to remain inward, to remain absorbed. Almost painful for him to have to speak to other people. This changed later when he got some hint from the Divine Mother that there'll be those who will come who will be able to understand and appreciate what you've been through and your words and your teachings. And then tremendous desire came in his mind. He would go to the roof of the Chandni every night and cry out. He would say, Mother, you told me, where are they? They haven't come yet. Please come, I'm waiting for you. I want to tell you all my innermost secrets and everything. Then he said, one by one they started to come, Rakal, Narendra, and others. So, a very wonderful lila. And then we find that the same Sri Ramakrishna, whose mind was so longing to remain merged and quiet and silent, how he could speak practically 24 hours a day, giving these beautiful teachings to his disciples. So we will stop here. I'll give the closing chant. Om Niranjanam Nityamanantarupam Bhaktanagam Bhaturavikraham Ishavataram Parameshamhityam Tam Ramakrishnam Shirasa Namama.